Hey Ron, what's going on?
Hey, not much, man. I'm always thinking about food here.
Yeah,
I
what
had
do
a,
we got going? What we got going on for lunch today?
I don't know, man. I was a little bad last night, man. I actually had like a little plain Jane vanilla ice cream cone, man. Every now and then that hits me, and I get that craving. I had a kid size vanilla, not no sugar-free stuff, the real deal. Dip it in a little bit of chocolate, man. It was so good.
So we're gonna have to get into that here in a little bit, but
I think
you
it's
know,
relative to what we're talking about. Everything about me relates to food, and we can
yeah,
we can form a solution with food and cars and technology and make the customer happy. We'll all have a belly full, and they'll have a solution that works.
yeah. If it's not an ice cream cone, it's cars. So with a rotary engine or something. So we'll have to get into that. I'm constantly learning about how you guys approach business with each one of your clients. It's different with each one because each one has a different solution, and so you guys have a solution oriented mindset. And that requires that you keep an open mind about brands and the cameras that they make and making sure that they go with the right servers and all the other equipment that go with it. And then you guys have the joy of putting all that together.
Oh, absolutely. And just kind of leading off of what you're saying. Remember, we're always out there to solve a problem, and the customer usually has a problem to solve. So versus saying I sell this product, that's not the way Red Ash does things. We look at what's the problem and how can we provide a solution. So over as you know, when you came over to Lake Sumter, that's our research and innovation center where we're testing hundreds of devices a year, and every now and then something really special comes through. And just like that little vanilla cone that I like, this is what everybody sees as their traditional cameras is considered a bullet form. You got a dome form, it's a single sensor. We're also seeing multi sensors that can do 180 degrees, and they each has a place in a design. And our process is we go through a design setup, conceptual, preliminary, and details, so that by the time the customer gets the solution, it's turnkey. We've tested it, they've seen footage of the actual camera, and they know what it is. But there's all these layers no one talks about, like the network to support this. And we have a very strong background in network engineering, and that's where we build a really robust network. We have our solution-oriented servers that we use in the theme park industry and the entertainment industry. So today,
Let me stop you there, right there. When you talk about the network layers that support it and nobody really talks about, can you kind of explain that a little bit more in
well, in the last
layman's terms?
10 years, everything went from analog to digital in our world, right? So we went from having cameras that ran on BNC with just a BNC connector to a sophisticated network device, right? I call it a network device running Linux with a lens on it, right? And these things are in the megapixels, anywhere from 1 megapixel to 180 megapixel. It depends on your budget and depends on what is required for that solution. But when you look at a lot of the problems that we're going out there to solve for previous installations, it's poor network design because we're taking a security industry that has no network knowledge. And then sometimes you're bringing in IT that has no knowledge of how these devices work. So when you deal with enterprise size systems, 200, 300, 4,000 cameras on a system, you're seeing so many issues, and you'll hear people complain, I wish I could go back to the analog days. And the answer is not going back to the analog days. It's understanding the network requirements and building a robust enough infrastructure to support it. So, just like my vanilla ice cream, that works for certain things. But when I want something a little more creative and colorful, and I'll go into some really good sushi. But the reality is, complexity comes with more understanding and the ability to do a design process to get the result.
Kind of give me an example when you talk about the ice cream cone. So I understand that like the ice cream cone is like your standard, what people know and understand. But then like as you start to add different layers of capability, like say the ability to see at night better or infrared or anything like that,
Yep.
that's just like really just adding dipping it in chocolate and adding sprinkles to the top of it, but it's still in the same layout, right?
Absolutely. So even when we look at the, using ice cream as my analogy here, We look at cameras that for a design for like a theme park attraction. And we're talking about it's a dark ride attraction. Most of these attractions, light levels are very low. And in order to keep that experience, you don't want to see those red blurring lights coming out of the camera. So you have to design this system with IR that is very low visibility, but yet the camera has to be able to capture the resolution that's required and the frame rates required. So when you look at an attraction that needs 30 frames per second, this is like casino grade in terms of the frames per second. You look at the resolution that's required, and now the light levels creates another twist. So what we do here is we scan multiple cameras from multiple manufacturers and do the testing every year to ensure we know which ones are the best at what function. So, like when I go to cars, we got the trucks that are great for pulling the boats. We got the sports cars that are great for going around the tracks. And then we got the type of sports cars that the 0 to 60 is insane and you can go in a straight line. So it all depends on which device you need. But
yeah, so the problem therein lies that all these different cameras are great in their individual potential, but like if you need a wide field of view from a distance, or you need a narrow view, a more pinpoint view, then you need potentially different cameras for that. It's very difficult to get all those to do one thing, something like that, and so that increases network demand. I hear you right.
Yeah. There's the network complexity. There's your storage complexity. Depending on the software that you're using, whether it's Genetec, Cognifion SSI, Avigilon, which is now Motorola, Exact, Indigo Vision, any one of these platforms, they all operate differently. So you have to create a harmony between all the components when you're delivering a solution. I think in a nutshell, that's what we do, is we provide that harmonic environment where everything is happy with each other so that the result is good. Because you can have a phenomenal camera on one piece, and then on the other end, the recorder can't handle the traffic that's coming into it, or you have a poor network switch or poor network design for that equipment. So, I mean, when we look at a camera like what I call my vanilla camera here, there's a million manufacturers out there with a 2 megapixel, 3 megapixel, 5, and they got a little IR, and they all have very similar specs. But, yesterday when we were over at the Innovation Center, something really innovative came through. And this spun off of the DARPA Gigapixel project, I understand. And this is what I consider, I've only seen one other device similar, but not as effective, or not with the potential this has to do more. So I'm going to reveal my little friend here. And I think of it as the sushi, that I was having there with all those colors and complexity. Or I think of it as such a paradigm shift when we went from piston engines to rotary engines like Mazda did back in the day, right? So they came out with a sports car that blew everybody away. So let me do this little reveal here. Drum roll, please. There we go.
Ta-da.
So there we go. We're looking at a computer. You heard that right, a computer. So this is the Acuity Mantis camera. And I believe this one is the 70-degree field of view. And what you're looking at effectively is a 100 megapixel camera with about, I think, 19 sensors on it right now. Depending on the field of view, the amount of sensors change. But this is a custom application camera. Now, while Acuity did a phenomenal job in building this camera, Red Ash, what we do is we tell you how to take this camera and make it part of the bigger solution. So Acuity makes this phenomenal camera that's got, I salivate when I say this. There's 10 NVIDIA TX computers inside of this camera that's processed and using Ubuntu. It's an amazing picture. You get this wide field of view. So imagine you're downtown Orlando or downtown Brooklyn, New York, by the waterfront, and you put a single camera like this at the top of a building. You can go ahead and you can zoom in and, on a very wide field of view, and get different focal lengths to allow you to zoom in on objects that are 600-800 feet deep in that field of view. And they do this with their software. They've got a really unique software that sits on their computer. So this sends all that raw data into the computer, and then they process that in real time. So as you're zooming in, it shifts lenses seamlessly allowing you to zoom in and out of that field of view. Now, while this is really cool, how do we put this into a real world scenario, Tony? Where do we put it in? Do we just sell a camera? The answer is no. So if we look at a theme park world, for example, they'll have some sort of a VMS, whether it be Cognify or whoever it may be. The reality is now, us as the design integration company, we're going to take this camera, and we've been working with our software manufacturers to tell them the features we're looking for in that integration. So it won't be a standalone product. You know, you've got your Lamborghini, but your team has to have a tow truck. You've got to have a whole team, a pit crew. So the rest of that pit crew, there's your VMS, your network switch architecture, you know, all those components that make a successful solution. So we're taking this camera, and you'll see some of the shots that we did from the Innovation Center. We had a pretty nice.
We'll try to integrate them here as we're talking if I get a chance.
Yep, absolutely. And you'll see in those shots the ability to zoom into that hospital was almost, you know, that hospital was about 800 feet away, 800 to 900 feet away from the window that we were looking out. Now, again, this would work great for citywide applications like your, you know, downtown New York, downtown Orlando. And if you were at one of the theme parks, one of the big open expanse areas like the downtown areas or the city, what they call the city walk areas, this would be perfect in an environment like that. But again, where does Red Ash Technologies come into this? Anyone can go to Acuity and buy this camera, right, from a licensed dealer. Our specialty is taking this now and bringing it together with your solution so that you have this meal that's a 4-course meal that's delicious from start to end. That's Red Ash Technologies in a nutshell.
Yeah, the ability to zoom in on that hospital that was probably, what, a quarter of a mile away, or at the same time being able to record the wide field of view.
Yep.
So you could zoom in and still capture what's going on at a 70-degree angle.
Yeah, it's a game changer. I think, Tony, this is probably one of 2 manufacturers that I've seen that's brought something like this to the market. This one seems to be the most seamless and open architecture that I've evaluated. And then, like I said, this group spins off of Duke University. They've got a lot of smart people, and those NVIDIA computers on board are capable of doing even more. So I can't wait to see where these guys are going to be in 2 years, because they can go in there and grab the faces and send us a face stream if we wanted out of that system. So I'm just scratching the surface what this thing is going to be able to do. So this combined with the right VMS platform and the right network architecture with some vanilla cams and, you know, what we see in the marketplace today, and you bring them together, you've got yourself a wicked solution. We're going to be doing some demos with this camera throughout the Florida state here, looking at some wide scenes and talking with customers that has a need for this camera. And, you know, in some cases, we're even doing something really unique. We're making this a time-lapse camera for a really large construction site. That's one of the requests that someone has made of us for this camera. No one would ever think of that, but if you have a huge construction site that's acres large, you put this high enough, you'll get the resolution throughout with depth and width at the same time. So when I say flexibility, it's got a lot of flexibility. But again, it's 100 megapixel, comes in 3 flavors: a 35, a 70 degree, and a 150 degree, I believe, is the other size on it. Yeah.
And could this be used for business analytics as well?
Oh, absolutely. There's so much, Tony, that this is capable of doing. Again, with 10 onboard computers, we really haven't scratched the surface of what these guys are doing. Most cameras don't have that processing power. So they've got a unique advantage here. And, you know, like I said, this has its application. It's part of a bigger solution. I don't see this as being the commodity like all vanilla cameras. I see this as something unique that certain clients that require large field of view. I'm thinking an airport. I'm thinking the runway area. I'm just coming up with some examples here where this thing will have a massive impact. And when you add on that layer of business intelligence, I'm thinking facial recognition. I'm thinking there's so many different pieces that can tie in here, Tony, to make this a really unique, fine steak.
Ramel, this has been a fun conversation. I mean, frankly, to be honest with you, between all the thinking about food that you do, I don't know how you get anything done, but I'm quite impressed. So, thanks for the conversation today.
You got it, man.